cognitive debt is about over-reliance on a tool that will diminish your cognitive capacity. It will ultimately take your ability to think with your own head. And the price we might pay for that might be extremely high. This cognitive debt aspect, there is no cognitive credit card. You will not be able to pay this debt off. So this is something we need to consider and think hard about.
Welcome to ODSC's AIX Podcast, your gateway to the latest in AI and data science. Whether you're an aspiring data scientist or a seasoned AI professional, we bring you insights from the best minds in the field, shaping the future of AI. This episode is sponsored by ODSC West, the premier AI Builders Conference celebrating its 10th year this October 28th to 30th in San Francisco and virtually. Learn more at odsc.com/California and use the code PODCAST for an exclusive 10% discount. Sheamus McGovern, the founder of ODSC, will be your host today.
Welcome to the ODSC AIX Podcast, where we explore the future of AI one conversation at a time. Now, in this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Natalia Koysina, a neuroscientist and researcher at the MIT Media Lab, whose recent study, Your Brain on ChatGPT, has sparked global conversations about how AI is changing the way we think, literally. We talk about cognitive debt, a powerful new term she's introduced to describe the long-term costs of relying too much on tools like ChatGPT, from reduced memory recall and lower creative engagement to the shift from creator to curator. Natalia's work raises important questions about how we interact with large language models and what it might mean for learning, education, and our future cognitive health. She also shares what inspired her to pursue this work, what brain waves can tell us about creativity, and why there is no cognitive credit card. You cannot pay this debt off. Whether you're an AI practitioner, educator, or just curious about how these tools are shaping your mind, this is a conversation you don't want to miss. Natalia, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Natalia, I'm super excited to have you on this podcast because the paper you and your co-authors published recently, Your Brain on ChatGPT, had a viral moment. But before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to research and write this paper?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually started, and my whole professional career is all around technology, which is known as brain-computer interfaces, so BCIs. You might have heard or not about this technology. In my case, I'm working with non-invasive ways of measuring brain activity and using this brain activity in a multitude of different applications. So I do a lot of work related to helping people who might not have any more ability to move objects around them, like wheelchairs, or control objects in a smart home environment. For example, turn on the light and things like that by just using their brain activity. So I do this for 16 years now and counting, but it actually all started when I was 8, when the first Matrix movie was released. I watched it over 17 times. My parents absolutely hated the movie. I guess more by my addiction to the movie, but yeah, I thought, as there is nothing better than that. It definitely inspired me to actually do what I am doing. I always wanted to, now I know Kung Fu moment, to actually make it happen. A lot of work since that time, everything I have been doing professional education wise was towards that moment. Fun fact, right? We're going to dive into that deeper. Now, to some extent, you can say that now I know Kung Fu, you can read everything about it, but do you truly know it? So yeah.
Natalia, that's excellent. And a big fan of the Matrix movies as well. I think there was 4 of them, but definitely the original one, the 1999 one. The Matrix was the best. I'm not a huge fan of the last one. I think it was The Resurrection. But yeah, great movies. And when you say non-invasive, is that mostly around placing sensors around the scalp?
Absolutely. What it means is that we're going to place a sensor, so in this case called electrodes, around on top, also on the surface of your head. They can be all over your head, so it could be like a cap style situation. It can be more user friendly, actually. Some form factors now include, you actually see if some of you see video clips of this podcast, or actually gonna go on and see some of the other work I'm talking about. In the background, you see pairs of glasses. Behind me, those have sensors that can pick up brain activity and measure it in real time. Think about a lot of XR systems, AI, AR, VR systems like Vision Pro and other headsets that already have these headbands that we can replace and enhance with the sensors that can measure brain activity. So it can be actually very user-friendly and almost unperceivable to the human eye. And of course, think about earbuds, headphones, face masks, eye masks, and more. These are much more user-friendly and closer to our body because they mimic regular, so to say, regular everyday form factors that we are using in our everyday tasks.
And wearable AI is going to be a big thing. There's been a few false starts, but it looks like Meta Ray-Ban glasses are having some impact. As I said in my introduction, Natalia, you're actually at the MIT Media Lab in Cambridge. And that's a fascinating place in and of itself because that's an interdisciplinary research lab that's focused on some very cool creative technology. So when you started mentioning those glasses and all that stuff, you want to tell people a little bit about the Media Lab and your work there.
Absolutely. I did my PhD in France, in Grenoble, in signal processing and brain-computer interfaces and HCI on this intersection. But I did move to MIT and I pursued my work on brain-computer interfaces. Effectively, there's a lot of super interesting, obviously, I'm very biased, right? So me telling you about the lab will be very biased perception, but we do a lot of work related to all different needs, right, of people all around the world. So some groups work a lot on understanding climate and climate change. Some groups work on understanding communities and how communities come together and work together. A couple of groups work on environments that are more city related, so on the bigger scale. And our group works on the intersection of psychology, neuroscience, and AI. We do a lot of cognitive augmentation or enhancement. That's the direction we are working on. And a lot of projects are related to sleep, to overall well-being, older adults, memory enhancement, augmentation, use cases where you want to support a person all different stages of their life and age, and different, again, needs of those users in different use cases. And effectively, it's very interdisciplinary. We have scientists, we have computer scientists, we have artists, we have different creators. So it's not just a classic, I would say, pure research lab that everyone needs to have pure like CS background, computer science background, like very specific background. Everyone is welcome. It's very fluid in that sense because it's opportunity to work together and bring your different experiences and expertise. It's a very rewarding environment to pull all these backgrounds together. We can see different perspectives from different walks of life and develop something that matters in society.
Yeah, Natalia, that's excellent. And working in Kendall Square in Cambridge myself, I've had the pleasure of attending quite a few events over the years at the MIT Media Lab. For people who can't attend in person, there's also some great online resources there as well. So I'll include a link in the show notes to the MIT Media Lab. But
there is a lot of like workshops that we actually share. Most of them actually are absolutely available. Not even registration is needed. You can absolutely rewatch them if the time zone doesn't work for you immediately. So we do share heavily, as actually the rest of MIT, obviously not only our lab, but the rest, we share all different workshops and resources. And of course, as classes, if you want to attend some of them, open courses, those are available in abundance. And most of them actually free of charge.
Fantastic resource. Cannot recommend it enough. Let's get to today's topic. The paper you and your co-authors published recently, Your Brain on ChatGPT. Very clever title, by the way. Can you briefly walk us through the key findings of your study to set the stage?
Absolutely. The study took place in Boston in person at Media Lab. So we, of course, are tethered to the location. So it could be also considered as one of the limitations right away. And we recruited 54 participants, and 50 among those are actually students from the schools nearby, like MIT, Tufts, Harvard, Wellesley, and others. So all schools from the greater Boston area. And we asked them to perform one specific task, which is essay writing. We invited them to come to the lab in person 3 times, and then some of them were able to come back for one more session. So 4 sessions total, but 3 sessions were attended by 54 participants. The 4th session was attended by 18 participants who agreed to come back. So the task of essay writing, we actually took not to rely on some prior knowledge, because imagine I'm going to ask you, okay, write me an essay about brain-computer interfaces, and you just learned about them 2 minutes talking to me. You'd be like, what can I write about? So not to rely on the prior knowledge. We actually took SAT type of prompts. Is it happiness? What is perfect society? Philanthropy, forethought. So should you think before you speak, etc. So something more high level that you would be able to hopefully talk about and actually develop into essay without any need of prior knowledge. We gave a time limitation. So students did have only 20 minutes to write this essay. Pretty limited time, but we found out this is actually average time they would spend on a similar task if they were to do this task. Note that neither of the students is any literature major, right? So they actually are all CS majors or looking to major in CS or computer science. So this is not something that they're doing professionally. And ultimately, we also gave them the choice for their essays. In addition to just having these high level prompts, we also offered them for each session, same 3 topics for each of them to pick from. For example, if you don't want to talk about perfect society, you maybe never thought about it, you don't really connect with the topic, you have 2 other topics to pick up from, and this is for each of the sessions. We measured for each participant their brain activity, so what we just talked about. We measured it non-invasively using EEG or electroencephalography with 32 electrodes or channels. We also analyzed the output, right, the essays themselves. So we looked how those were written, what type of words were used, etc., etc. Finally, we asked 2 teachers to help us rank, so evaluate those essays, because we are obviously not the experts in that. So those teachers were not with us from the beginning. We recruited them and paid them after the study took place. They didn't actually know the setup of the study. They were not part of the study. They were not located in Boston, never been there. So the idea was to keep them very separate from the study. We gave them their essays. We told them, these people are not literature majors. They had 20 minutes for the essays. Please rank them, come up with a scale and get back to us and tell us what you found. Finally, we also asked our participants several questions after the study took place. So after each session, we were asking them some questions. This was a main part of the study. And then finally, for this 4th session, that was a bit apart. And it was a bit apart, first of all, because not everyone was able to come back, which is, again, normal, but also because we swapped participants. They didn't know about this beforehand, but everyone who came back, they were reassigned in an opposite group. So, for example, if you were originally with us for the study and you were assigned in a ChatGPT group, you actually got into brain-only group, and vice versa was also accurate. So if you were originally in the brain-only group, when you came for the 4th session, you gained access to ChatGPT. So now we needed to write an essay using ChatGPT. Instead of giving you completely new sets of essays, we actually gave you the choice to write the essays from the topics you had already written about. So these were the major setup, right? And of course, I cannot stress enough, supposed to say this in the beginning, but I will highlight again. All of these participants were divided in these 3 groups, which is very important. One was only allowed to use ChatGPT. That's why the paper is called Your Brain on ChatGPT. It's literally the LLM we used, which is ChatGPT. The second group was allowed to use search engine. So in this case, it was Google. They're not allowed to use any type of website that hosts a chatbot, but they could just use anything online that they found. And the only difference is that functionality, the AI functionality right now that summarizes on top of the page was off. So that was not available to you. Finally, of course, as you already have all guessed, the brain-only group or tools-free group, how we also call it in the paper, were the participants who were not allowed to use anything at all except their own brain. So they only had their brain to write those essays. They couldn't go online, check any references, any links, or use any type of website whatsoever. So these were the major 3 groups. And this is how we performed our study.
I will include a link in the show notes to the paper itself if people have not already read it. It is quite an involved read, but a very important read. It got me thinking about this debate around how technology affects our thinking, right?
Yeah.
We're all familiar with debates around cognitive offloading, delegating those mental tasks to tools like a scientific calculator. And then, of course, the Google effect, which I used to get in college, was like when you go Google this information, there's a tendency to forget the information that you looked up on Google. That's been around for years. But what I really liked about your research is it added a new term in the vocabulary for me, cognitive debt, right?
Yes.
As technologists, we always talk about technical debt. Cognitive debt was a great term. And you put a name on something I was concerned about already. As a user of these tools, that's the longer term cost of our cognitive abilities that we try and build up over time. Could you explain to our audience how cognitive debt differs from cognitive offloading and the Google effect and why it actually may even be more harmful?
Absolutely. Excellent point that you already made in your introduction and overview of different technologies. As humans, we are excellent in creating different tools to support us. And with all the tools we are creating, we actually usually extending our lives. So we actually living longer lives. And in most cases, actually healthier life, right? Look at the lifespan from 50 years ago and now, right? it actually increased significantly almost everywhere in the world. However, I would argue that these tools ultimately did not make us happier. These tools usually do take something from us. I love the quote, not mine. Each augmentation is an amputation. The idea here is that with the Google, there is a cost of memory. I've had several excellent papers, seminal papers from 2011 from Sparrow and colleagues and others about the effect of Google effect on memory and having it available to you. But think about it, when the paper was out, I heard so many times the mention of GPS and calculators. You cannot imagine. Actually, I'm planning to count how many times people did mention, oh, LLM is like a calculator. We didn't become dumb because calculator got introduced, or we didn't become dumb because GPS is introduced and now we are driving using GPS. Effectively, yeah, we did not become dumb because of those. But immediately, a very important counterintuitive point maybe here. You do not talk to a calculator about your feelings. You do not share with the calculator your worries. You're doing a very specific, very limited set of operations, mathematical operations, a very specific domain, and that what it solves for you. That is it. LLMs have so much more to that. I'm going to actually read, a lot of people also brought GPS. We do not cite any papers on GPS in our paper because I didn't find them directly relevant, but they might be great to add additionally in the next papers that we will maybe mention as a follow-up. GPS actually is a phenomenon that was very well studied as well by the colleagues several years prior. And they actually retested the users of GPS and they found significant differences in special memories. So that actually would not be very surprising. But think about the GPS from the other perspective, right? It's not just the fact that we are now not able as well orient ourselves in the space, right? Like, do we really need this? We are not like from thousands years ago when there were all these forests and we needed to figure out where the danger is and not go there. Yes, but again, back to the GPS, right? Now these are the companies, limited number of companies telling you how to get from point A to point B. This is a completely different direction. I'm not going to go further because we're going to talk to it from the perspective of LLM, but it's something very important. I don't know if you ever noticed, but when I need to get from point A to point B using Uber, I'm very often going to Massachusetts General. So a hospital here in Boston has multiple centers all around. So it's actually, some of them are around 1 hour ride from me. So pretty far away. It takes in Uber exactly 1 hour. When I'm driving, it takes 23 minutes. We are talking same days of the week, right? No like rush hours, etc. It's exactly same times because I'm there for appointments to see the patients. So that's, and tells you a lot, right? About how the algorithm puts you where you need to be and prevents you potentially from thinking about, oh, is there like actually a better way to, do I need to take this highway, specifically this highway? Maybe I don't need to do that, etc. So it's really not about efficiency of the cost. Cognitive debt is what we introduced in the paper. And a lot of people thought that we are talking about brain activity, so findings related to brain activity. But actually not. We talked about it from the perspective of all of our findings in the paper. It's very relevant to this point. You have potentially diminished capacity in critical thinking, creativity, and other aspects, but you are also using vocabulary where you actually have not been as the author of that vocabulary. So you actually came up with the vocabulary that was suggested to you by an algorithm owned by a for-profit company, very important. And you didn't even potentially have a say in this choice of vocabulary. And then it's going to bleed out in any of your interactions. And this cycle will continue and continue. And more importantly, you might lose an ability to ask a question, actually. The art of asking questions, the ultimate art, what the LLMs right now are all about. You put a prompt in to help you solve a problem. So that's what cognitive debt is about, right? Where the data is coming from, and we know it's a lot of stolen data with confirmation biases, other biases, training biases that then being used and potentially manipulated in the way that the user might not be aware of or not seen explicitly. And this is where a lot of these dangers are actually coming from. I hope that it's actually not true. But again, one of the billionaires, right? No names here mentioned, but who owns a social media company, who owns an AI company, a satellite company, and a brain implant company, suggested that their AI company called Grok would potentially consider opening to advertisement or ads. So think about it. You're asking your child, oh, or like you went to a party, you over drank some soda, right? You're like, oh, what happened to my stomach? Is it good? Do I need to go to the ER? I think I drank too much soda. And it will say, no, it's okay. But if you use this soda for $99.99, you will feel so much better. Cognitive debt is about over reliance on a tool that will diminish your cognitive capacity. It will ultimately take your ability to think with your own head, right? So this is what it is about. It's much more dangerous than just relying a part of your memory on your phone, right? For example, I would never remember we had an appointment for this podcast if it's not for my calendar that is obviously in my phone, right? But this is much more different because that just provided me with information that we have an appointment and that this is the link I need to join. It's much more complicated because it makes suggestions about all aspects of your life, much more than just letting you find this information somewhere at a later time. That's why it's very incorrect to make comparisons to phones and their calculators or GPS. If you were to make a comparison, I think the closest we can get is to social media, but it's mostly actually on the harm's way. And back to the example of how we did not regulate social media in time, and now we are still living with consequences. So this is more, I would say, accurate comparison if you want to compare.
Going back to something else you mentioned, I constantly see this as a problem because I also work with startups helping them figure out how to get into the market and other groups, sales groups and things like that. I see, as you mentioned, this big vocabulary gap. LLMs are pretty much all the same, right? They're very similar in vocabulary, phrasing, and stylistic choices. I know people debate all the time, whoever's got the best model for writing emails and whatnot. But for me, they all look stylistically the same. I see the big gap when I'm talking to salespeople, the AI scripts they give them have a hard time learning because they're using a vocabulary and a language they may not be familiar with. You know what I mean? Because we know LLMs tend to be very verbose. And because of that, salespeople have a hard time recalling their AI generated sales scripts, to use an example. You and your co-authors highlighted this very well in your paper. The ownership of that vocabulary feels lacking, and also the comprehension of what's written. There seems to be a gap there. So if you could talk to those 2 points, ownership and comprehension.
So we effectively saw that in the essays, right? So the output of the task, the LLM group produced the most homogeneous essays, meaning they were really very similar to each other. The teachers who helped us found the same thing. They even asked us, oh, did these two people sat next to, obviously they didn't know the setup, it was not no sitting next to each other, but they said, this is two people sit next to each other while they were writing the essays. And like, those are all different people, different days, everything was different. That tells you about the vocabulary. Back to the point that it is homogeneous, it also goes in a very specific direction. It's the topic of happiness, right? The ChatGPT group talked about career choices. He would say, oh, but those are students. Of course, they worry about career. It might be super important for them right now. Absolutely. But don't forget that 2 other groups, search engine and brain only, are also students. So you would say for them all from same school. So for them all, like career should be important. But no, a search engine group heavily relied on vocabulary about giving, and brain only group relied on vocabulary about true happiness. Let that sink in, how different vocabulary is and how biased it is. And ultimately, what it does, it takes this edge of creativity, of what makes us unique, because that's the whole idea. No one needs a perfectly written essay. The idea in writing an essay is to express yourself, your thoughts, your fears, your worries. That's what is important. And back to the ownership, 15% from session 1 of ChatGPT users reported no ownership at all. A lot of people online actually told us, not surprising, they didn't write those. Absolutely. They didn't write those. But think about it. You cannot actually quote anything from your essay. We found this as well from ChatGPT group. You don't feel that's yours. So you ultimately do not care. So if you do not care, what is there to beat? What is there to remain? Because think about it, if you are a student, this is obviously, again, a lab-controlled study, right? But move this for a second, forget about the lab controlled setup, and imagine that this happens in a real life. Education, let's take education. So you do not care about the output, then why you are in school, right? Like why you're doing, what are you doing there? And if you're doing this at work, what are you trying to bring with your work to humanity, to society? Like, if you also don't care, what quality of work can you ensure, right? That if you do not care, and a lot of work, as we know, actually heavily dependent on actually to care, right? Teachers, a lot of other professions that keep us safe, keeps those flights flying, right? All of that is so sensitive, right? You actually do want those people to care, truly to care. So think about that. The challenge is that it will develop even further with those who are younger, because we are still here talking about adults. So you and me, we were born without this technology, right? So obviously, a lot of people are people who were part of our study were born without this technology. It's only 3 years old at this point. There is so much more to understand and to learn. But think about those younger brains, those children who are born now with that technology, they're like 3 years old. What will happen to the brain that is a young brain who will get exposed to this for the most important years of their life? For brain development, of course, I'm talking about. Those are the most critical. Adulthood is, of course, important, but that's all already formed. Neuroplasticity, of course, not all set in stone, but it's much more different when you're adult compared to when you're a child. And the price we might pay for that might be extremely high. This cognitive debt aspect, there is no cognitive credit card. You will not be able to pay this debt off. And there is no free cheese altogether. So this is something we need to consider and think hard about.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, which I hadn't thought too much about when I was reading the paper. Now that you mention it, it was extensively covered in the paper because, yeah, someone growing up in the LLM age versus someone who's already gone through K through 12 education and beyond in their careers. Because, as you said, a lot of people said in the finals, how we surprised in this. What was so magical about ChatGPT and similar models was I give it a prompt and all of a sudden this copy and paste results came out. Basically, it was copy and paste. Half the time, I'm sure people don't even read what's generated by ChatGPT, if at all. They will just take it and copy and paste it. And that definitely leads to that cognitive offloading you mentioned. So any recommendations on how to make sure that we establish ownership of the outputs of these LLMs in cases where we don't want to just copy and paste?
Absolutely. It's very easy and very seductive to fall into this trap of a shortcut, right? Our brain does look for shortcuts. And of course, if there is one, it will get on this train. That's why like social media and the feed was designed by neuroscientists, because that's how the brain functions. The challenge is to understand the cost of the interaction. What actually are you looking from the interaction? Hey, the question is, cannot you write that email yourself? Why do you need a system to help you write it? Is it because your grammar is so bad, you're just feeling unconfident? It's such an important email that you really want to make sure that it's top notch. Your maybe native language that you're using, if this is not your native language you're writing, like what is the reason? And the second question, what you have been doing 3 years ago when the system didn't exist? And the final question here would be, do you need to kill a gallon of water and 7 trees for that email to happen? Right? Because again, in addition to cognitive cost, there is also a true cost to our planet that is already on fire. And so this is why it's so important to understand, do you really need it or not? And second, you would think that, okay, I need it for these applications, for specific applications, but did we put any consideration in designing these applications? Your point, right, there is, I would do interrogation. Great. Several weeks after our paper was released, I released a study mode for ChatGPT, right? Now, apparently it doesn't give you a response, but it allows you to get questions, understanding, but it doesn't get you access to the response. The default mode for the user stays there. You can still go immediately. From what I understand, conversations do start with the default mode. So tell me honestly, who will go in the study mode? Okay, I'm going to give it 1 person out of 10, 2 people out of 10, but not 10 out of 10. Because again, you have a shortcut that allows you to immediately go and get an answer. Why would I try to go through some hoops to get to the answer if I have more important things to do? But what are the more important things to do? Another point is that this heavy promotion that we gain time, we gain in performance and productivity. There's not a single paper that talks specifically about gain in performance and productivity for any person who actually uses any type of LLM, ChatGPT or not. So it might be true, but there is no data that you actually gain in anything. And I like how I hear some people saying, I'm using like 4 or 5 agents. I'm like, oh, wow, how much money is that?
Tokens.
Okay, forget energy, cost. People don't have this money. Minimal wage is still 1 month of use. But then when do you have time to talk to your loved ones, to actual humans around you? Like your girlfriends, boyfriends, wives, husbands. If you're talking to multiple agents, are you really gaining in time if you are talking to that and waiting? What are you doing in between? You are waiting for response, right? Because you really cannot do anything else, really, truly, like in a high quality time. I can tell you that as a scientist, if you're thinking that you are fooling yourself, that's not the quality work that you're doing while you're waiting, right? What exactly are you gaining? Really, truly. You need to understand this is very important, right? What is the cost? What are you giving away? I can tell you what you're giving away. You are giving the remaining of your data away, right? Because the current AI, current LLM is all about that, to suck in the remaining of the data that was not taken from the rest of the internet. So these agents that you are using, like you're allowing access to your emails, to plan the trip to Paris yourself or whatever it is doing, you can. It's actually pretty engaging to do it yourself, but at the same time, you allowed it to give access to your credit card, your banking account, your something else. Oh, we are all unfortunately looking forward at so many data leak issues. I cannot even comprehend. I can imagine the number of things we're going to be seeing. That's the only thing it is right now actively used for. There is no other truly proven use case. So we need to be really cautious about why and how we use it, and do we still use our brain while we are using the systems?
Yeah, I got to say, when it comes to agentic workflows, I'm really focusing a lot on that because from my perspective, a lot of points you made in Natalia are very well taken. But a lot of my day-to-day job and a lot of other people's jobs is that we don't have exciting jobs. One of our other podcasters called it toil work, where my email right now is broken. I have to go through a lot of emails, a lot of LinkedIn messages, and I'm trying to agentify that to a certain reason. And yeah, I get what you're saying. A lot of it's very inefficient at the moment. It doesn't work well. It's very much a high technical debt for doing what is a pretty simple task. But I do hope over time it'll get better and it will lead to less toil work. But I also want to go back to another point because I think this is super important. And one thing I've got a lot of concerns about, you see the amount of fear mongering in the media. Anytime there's an issue in the job market, it's AI's fault, right? I learned a long time ago, I used to work in finance, and whatever happened in the financial markets, they would always have a reason for why something happened in the financial markets, even though most of the time we don't know why a stock went up or why it went down, because a lot of trading in finance is very private. There is a tendency to apply a story or news on something when they're not sure. For a lot of young people and people in careers, there's angst around AI in the job market. And I think that's well founded. And I think there's a lot of hype there. But even going to something more basic, people are saying, how do I deal with AI as a competitor almost? A favorite phrase of mine is, and I've been using it for the last decade, to write is to think. When I say this to salespeople, marketing people, engineers, just write it down. Because I found throughout my 3 decades of a career that when I sit down and I write about something, it really gets the cognitive juices going. It's the same thing we try and do at ODSC with our workshops. A lot of people will say, oh yeah, just show me the code and I can see how it runs. But to write code, even though an AI agent can code for you, is a big difference here. Does your finding support or challenge the idea that writing itself is a critical part of thinking?
It's very important to understand that a lot of people say, oh, essay writing, what a strange task. Why would you even go with this task? We actually did coding task as well. And this was my choice to release the paper on essay writing first. For that very reason, writing is effectively not about the fact that you will figure your grammar. And it's really about having your thoughts shared, structuring your thoughts, being able to have arguments and connect with a fellow human reader. If you are writing for humans, like we wrote this paper for humans and by humans, we didn't write it for AI to be read by AI. So it's really important to understand what are you actually optimizing for. And the idea is that writing is thinking, but also expressing yourself. What I didn't include in the paper, that a brain-only group actually not was able to give correct quotes for their essays. Some of them were able to recite a whole essay, not because they have some amazing memory, but because they were so passionate about the topic. They wanted to share their thoughts because guess what? They just wrote about it, bring it to a date night situation. So you're having a conversation and you have not a lot of things to say, right? Or you need to rely on some interface to get that. Versus, hey, if it is passionate, you have your thoughts. They might not be perfect. They might be contradicting, But that's where that grows, right? People try to understand each other, argue with each other as well. This is where these additional thoughts are coming from, right? AI cannot be your thought partner. That's like the most also stupid definition I see. Absolutely and 100% disagree with that. The partner is your loved one, your husband, your wife, your friend at your school, at your work, but that's not an AI agent. That is not a thought partner. It has zero thoughts. It's very important to also understand that vocabulary is being used. I would say it's not a lie, of course, but it is sometimes really tricking some of the people in believing that this maybe has some thinking entity to it. And that's why the interface actually needs to change. So we don't have this misunderstanding for some people that they believe that there is some thinking happening or anything of the sort. Clear disclaimers need to happen with these systems to prevent some of the significant cognitive and mental crises that we will be also facing in addition to everything. And then finally, it's very important. You mentioned financial markets and all of these risks, right? And effectively, negative news, you're absolutely right. They do sell better, we know, because it's also survival. If you hear bad news, you know that you need to be ready. It's back from our evolution. You need to get ready to actually run away because there is danger for your survival. That's how we take bad news. But the challenge is that we hear a lot of positive news. It's not about bad and good. It's about the actual data. Do we have the data that shows X, Y, and Z? And back to the financial markets, they were the first one to lose to this algorithmic madness in trading, of course. But think about FCC. They still have the power to run back on the transactions that were approved, but there is no getting back with your brain. So Federal Trade Commission I'm talking about. How are you going to cancel those transactions in your head? You will not, especially if you're going to just use it.
Yeah, like you can't unsee it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic points, Natalia. So many questions I have popping up in my head when you go through this. I'm not sure if this is part of your study, but are there warning signs when AI is shifting from being a tool to being over-reliant on it? Because I have seen this throughout my work and even caught myself, like you said, or I'm writing an email, I start to second guess myself because right now, all the tools of AI, it doesn't matter if you're using a document, spreadsheets, email, research, they all have AI tools built in now, and it's so easy to push that AI button. So for our listeners, are there warning signs that you as a user are becoming overly reliant on AI?
So we got around 3,600 emails from teachers all around the world, and they had a lot to say. But more importantly, we got around 500 emails, and I'm not going to tell you how many of those were actually from family members that told, hey, my wife, my husband have a relationship with an agent or agents, and they talk to them in bed instead of me, and they ignore our children. For each interaction, they say, I ask a question, for example, what we're going to have for dinner. And they will take a phone and type this in Chat GPT. What would be the best thing to have for dinner? What is this in for the sake of anything? So that's psychosis, right? That's actually the term. So it's a condition, it's a mental condition. I don't work with these conditions, very important. So it's, of course, there are specialists who would have a lot of things to say, but people do see without even being professionals, multiple personalities. And all of these things could end up pretty dramatically for society, right? Because that's not a one or two isolated cases. There's no way for us to know, even based on the emails I'm getting, these are all real people, right? There might be bots, some generated. Oh, there's definitely a lot of that for sure. But isn't it crazy that you are asking us, well, your husband apparently stays next to you, have two little children, and you are asking the system what you're going to have for dinner? Cannot you open a fridge? What would you want to have for dinner with your family? What is your favorite dishes, restaurants, what you have to cook? AI can help you figure out this thing, right? So it's very important to understand that this is just 3 years in, right? What will happen when you have a child who now, obviously, a lot of education systems, as we learn from teachers and all around the world, we see the news reports, it's almost a push to have these systems urgently implemented all over in all levels from our education systems and all around the world. But there is a fear of missing out on education. There is a huge drop in reading, in math skills, and it goes down and down in each country. So what have we missing out? Do you think AI will fix it? It's gonna make your English more fluent? No, it's English that is trained on data that was stolen. It's not your English skills. It's not your math skills. So there is no need to push it so aggressively right then and there before we have data to understand the best ways to integrate it, right? Back to the point, yeah, I'm using it. When was the last time someone actually used something that is not default browser, for example, right? Somewhere you would make an explicit choice not to share the data or go some other path with the data. A lot of people do not use AI. They do not activate those features on purpose. And this is a choice. It doesn't mean that it works for everyone. And I understand that there are use cases where it can be a support for you, even those features that when they're repeating themselves, but it needs to be very clearly stated. And again, it's part of a huge UI UX problem that these systems do have, that this is not a human. Sometimes can make mistakes. Yeah, we figured that it makes mistakes. What about all other issues, which do need to be labeled explicitly? We have labels on other addictive items when you purchase a bottle of alcohol, when you smoke, right? I believe that there are photos. So I'm not a smoker, so I don't know. But there are photos that say, hey, this is what will happen to your body if you do that. We know how this influences it. And we have labels for that. People who use it can get addicted, but also know the cost. And think about younger brains. We do not have the data. It's only been 3 years. But if you have this use in educational environment, let's say age of 10, let's even make it 13, right? Like 13, age of 13. It's what OpenAI and Mattel promised, that their toys are going to be age 13 and higher. So let's take school environment, age 13 to 18, till you are done with the high school and you go in college, university, whatever. 5 years, you're going to end up being what? You live as a user, as a customer for technology. You have been user because your school made it. So someone else took your actual consent of using this, because they're not asking for consent. For children, it's called assent. They're just going to push these systems, and then you're going to be a user, a customer. And then guess what? Fun fact I remember from someone else on LinkedIn that only software developers and drug dealers call people users. No one else calls those people users.
That's a good point.
And you will have this use now. You're like, oh yeah, I used it in school, so it's okay. And now I'm going to continue using it in the rest of my life. But more importantly, you have been using it for 5 most critical years of your life when your brain was developing, right? So what did you pay for? You paid with your brain, with your ability to critically think and to be creative. So it's, again, this very important trade-off of what we are also pushing our children to do without asking their consent, right? And that consent is explicit. When you ask for consent, explicitly mention, as we do in our protocols, when you sign a consent form, what will happen if you use it, right? It's a mandatory section at MIT. I'm pretty sure it's mandatory section in all other consent forms. This is what will happen if you use the system, if you are part of our study participation. All potential dangers need to be clearly stated, and what can be supported needs to be stated. But do we do this with those systems? No, we don't.
Again, excellent points, Natalia. Yeah, that youth over-reliance on an AI. I have started to read more about that, and we have seen, as you mentioned, independent studies, and even Sam Altman, OpenAI CEO, has said that, you said we don't have the data yet, but the large foundation labs have the data.
Guess what? They have the data on the use, and of course, they're not going to be sharing. But what they're not doing, right? And they're not going to share that. They're not actually recording what's happening with all these creative tasks, thinking tasks. They do not care ultimately. I would argue they do not care about their users. So the impact of their technology on humans. I can tell you, I just came back from the Silicon Valley. I had been there for 10 days for work and for conference. And guess what? It's heavily driven by money, not by the needs of humans in society.
As most technology is.
We do need to shift this paradigm. It's really unhealthy, but it also can be very detrimental to our development as society.
Yeah, and I can see that there's definitely escalating mental health concerns, because when the CEO of ChatGPT is telling you that over-reliance on ChatGPT is a common thing, with users looking for decisions ranging from daily mundane choices to major life questions and career decisions. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, but when you're relying solely on data, it does behoove the foundation labs to understand what safeguards should be built.
I want to make 2 important points here. First, I remember when the paper effectively went viral, right? And people started sending me like, oh, have you seen this post or that post? Once someone sent me a post from Twitter, X, and I went there. I'm not really using it. I do have an account. I'm not using it. And so I immediately got served like 10 breakthroughs this week from AI. So apparently these people are called AI influencers. I didn't know this vocabulary before the paper, but there are now people who are called AI influencers apparently. And so there is a lot apparently them specifically on X. And so there was like a list of 10 breakthroughs in AI this week. And our paper was number 7. And I said, okay, what is those lists at all? So I scrolled through 10, just 10, right? Being fully transparent. And I don't know if this person was even a bot or real human. But you know what I noticed? In those 10, I scrolled backwards. So from these weeks where our paper was featured, number 7 to like 9 previous weeks, apparently, I saw a lot of news about foundation model, this test, that test, new GPUs, this data center. What I haven't seen is actual evaluation on humans, something relevant to our paper or similar papers. Everything is AI, but if we are talking AI for humanity, we need to see the word human more often. That's a super important point to not forget. The second point is how much actually the we are hearing from also using the technology would be very interesting to really understand. Mostly because they made their careers before this technology was available to them. They learned how to ask the question, hard questions, right? They walked the walk, and now they are capable of doing so. But we should not forget about people who are just being born and still need to even learn the art to ask a question. My final point, nothing better for using it, right? But I do think that use case and who uses it is actually dramatically important. It's that old expression that I know everyone knows, no taxation without representation. I heard that some prime ministers in some countries apparently are using ChatGPT. And I actually saw one interaction firsthand. I was present, so I heard it firsthand. And this is not where my taxes are supposed to go. I did not vote for ChatGPT use. I voted for this human to represent me and my causes. So if I needed to have a choice for ChatGPT, maybe we will have this later, who knows, that needed to be clearly stated, right? My money, my hard-earned money, and maybe money of some other people who might agree, should not go without explicit consultation if you actually want to allow to use by our representatives the technology that belongs to another country, another government, and the closed loop technology. So this is something also to consider. So who uses is very important. And when they use it, and when they're so direct about it, I do have a lot of questions there.
Yeah, that's an absolutely fantastic point when our elected representatives are taking their advice from a LLM, which has
they're taking
alignment.
Musk and Sam Altman, and those are not people I voted for. So that's something to keep in mind.
And to be fair, I know the Foundation Labs are working towards addressing some of these concerns.
Well, yeah.
And OpenAI has released some stuff in July, and Google has as well. Yeah, and I'll be very curious to see that paper on the effects on coding, because those of us who are software engineers, at some point in your career, you get kicked out of your coding role, you become a manager, you become a coding manager. The angst that always occurs is, okay, I'm not going to be able to have the ability to code anymore. I'm going to be doing more of my time in management and lose my coding skills. As a software engineer, where's my worth if I can't code anymore? This is a decade-old problem, but in your paper, that brain-only group performed very well. But then when an LLM group goes back to using brain-only, maybe I misinterpret that, but they can regain those skills that they... No,
ChatGPT group didn't regain, but what actually happened, if there is more research done, more objective data, right, we can have very interesting findings that could be supported maybe to be integrated in those systems. What happened is that when brain-only group, right, regained access to ChatGPT when they didn't have any of that access initially, their brain connectivity was significantly higher than that of the brain-only group. So it could potentially mean timing, like as a lot of other features that could be in play here when you use it, timing can be critical. It's back to the point that I made over this conversation, that if you already know the skill, you develop the skill. Let's take a child who is at school. Let's do first semester, whatever subject it is, they are learning it without any use of LLMs of any sort. And then the second semester, for example, they get introduced to an LLM. Did they become an expert in ancient history? No, but at least they have some of the base. They have some of the understanding of the subject. So of course, now they can potentially ask better questions, pick up when there is inconsistent, incorrect information happening. It doesn't mean that it's a solution, but it's one of the practices that we see that can potentially help develop a skill, become an expert. And then there is a potential to get improvements with this technology. It definitely can support some of those. The whole idea is, hey, do we know effectively before we just release randomly test on whole society, and then, oh, we should have maybe done this study mode and not to have this like default mode in school, right? Let's just do this proactively, not reactively. Test it, figure out the best practices, implement them, and continuously support those practices, so they need to be updated once the technology effectively moves forward. That's the whole idea here as well, to really, because it is continuous loop and this needs to be updated almost in real time.
Yeah, very good points, Natalia. And just to wrap this up, what final advice would you give to an individual around using large language models in their daily life?
No, absolutely. So
Yeah.
I would recommend, first of all, of course, right, effectively do use your brain. Do not be just a copy machine repeating, as in those use cases that we mentioned, and we hear more and more, just open an interface of an LLM and repeating what is written, right? No human wants to hear that. People don't like that. No one likes that. If I need to hear from an agent that is ChatGPT, Gemini, someone else or something else, I will go and ask them. I want your human opinion. So don't be a repeat machine. That's not helpful. So definitely use your brain first. Second thing, understand the use cases. Where do you truly need it and where you maybe just use it because of convenience? That could be because others are using it and you decided to also use it, right? Where are really your needs are, right? And how does it help you with those needs? Do you really have a need to go and refine your vocabulary to perfection? Are you actually learning the language and you want others to support? Finally, of course, a very important point is understand the cost, right? There is no free cheese. There is always a cost. So figure out the cost of their interaction. The cost is, of course, not only cognitive, but also the cost for the planet, for the society, for the community. Look further. Are they next to you? Even if they're not next to you in your county, in your country, right, where you live in your city, there's still a cost that will land on your pockets for that energy, for that water use. So you do want to understand what does it do, right, to your literal credit card, right? And are you really wanting to bear this cost with your community, with your society? That's something to keep in mind. Do take care of children, right? It could be your children, of course. It could be that overall the young developing brains, they are effectively at the highest risk. So whatever you can do to support them and your loved ones, and try to, of course, share some of this information with the loved ones and with the children around you to educate more on, of course, advances, but also potential risks and challenges that these systems face.
Yeah, and where I live is in New England. And now I think it's Massachusetts and Connecticut have one of the highest surcharges increases this year on energy bills.
Yep.
Part of the reason they're blaming that on, again, this is the news reports. How true this, I do not know. But because of the rise of data centers, and they're putting that surcharge on there. So these data centers.
It's literally you are paying with your hard-earned money. This is something that a lot of people would have a hard time reconciling. You do need to get those companies accountable and make those billions that they are getting from the government and put in work to actually fix some of those issues.
Especially, you can imagine people retired on a fixed income, they're not using AI at all. And yet the rest of us using AI. Natalia, when's the next paper coming out around this study?
The next one is about coding.
Awesome.
So,
we might have to have you back on for that one.
Absolutely, yes. A lot of things to say there, for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to be really interested in that study. Natalia, again, as I said before, this has been profoundly insightful. This has been very important to me as a consumer of these products, how to think consciously about how I'm using them, the energy cost, the cognitive debt. As I said earlier, it's been a masterclass in understanding our brains on ChatGPT and similar models. Thank you so much. And we will follow your work. I'll include a couple of links to show notes. Where do you mostly post?
Yeah, mostly LinkedIn, but the best link I can send you as a follow-up is to include the website of the project, because I already spoke about it. So like brainonllm.com is the best one to include in the show notes. Yeah.
Great name, brainonllm.com.
Yes.
I think that'll age well. So Natalia, thank you so much. And we'd love to have you speak at an ODSC conference in the future.
Yes, absolutely.
Maybe ODSC East next April. Thank you again, Natalia. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Your engagement directly contributes to the growth and success of our community. Please subscribe now and don't miss out on the next enlightening episode. This episode is sponsored by ODSC West, the premier AI Builders Conference celebrating its 10th year this October 28th to 30th in San Francisco and virtually. Learn more at odsc.com/California and use the code PODCAST for an exclusive 10% discount. Supporting our podcast by subscribing not only helps our small dedicated team at ODSC, but also unlocks exclusive benefits for you.